It's your host, Gabe Morales, continuing with our series on Mexican drug trafficking organizations. Be advised, there are some very graphic pictures that will be included here in this video at times, so just be forewarned. I will be covering their faces, and they are not intended to gross you out, but I will show a few just so you will have no doubt that these groups are blatant narco-terrorists. The Gulf Cartel has been around for a long time, having its plazas and areas of control near the South Texas-Mexican border. Much of what I include in these videos, I learned from drug cartel experts like Joe Garza and Robert Garcia, both of who taught for me over the years, as well as other subject matter experts, some who are included in this video. As we stated last time, drug trafficking organizations have been active in Mexico for about 100 years now, but they became a huge problem when demand for drugs grew during the 1970s, in large part due to rock pop culture and marijuana use became more socially acceptable. Stand-up comedy and movies like Up in Smoke by Cheech and Chong, featuring lots of marijuana use, became the thing. By the way, my mentor, Robert Moncoverde Morel, had a small bit role in that movie as the undercover police officer in the brown leather jacket who peers through Cheech's window just before his cousins are deported back to Mexico after they played a gig in East LA. If you recall, they called the Migra on themselves for the free trip back home. Moco was also an advisor into the movie Blood In, Blood Out and American Me. Here he is shown at his home in Arizona a few years before he died, with a poster from the movie in his living room, visibly signed by director and main character Edward James Olmos. These highly sought-after marijuana buds were often sold in small Ziploc baggies and sold for around $10. These buds were often smoked in water bongs. Heroin use was around during the 1970s, but it was mostly used by rock stars, old convicts, or returning Vietnam vets. However, cocaine came back in style big time. In the mid-1970s, Mexican drug trafficking pioneer Juan Nepomucelo's nephew, Juan Garcia Abrego, began utilizing his uncle's connections and developed an organization that would be referred to as the Gulf Cartel. Although they smuggled in marijuana, this organization primarily was dedicated to the lucrative business of smuggling in cocaine, which, like I said, was gaining in popularity again in the United States. Garcia Abrego developed close ties to the Cali cartel in Colombia, and he worked out a wise deal to keep 50% of the loads instead of the previous 1,500 per kilo that was usually granted to Mexican smugglers. This created quite a problem for the cartel because now they needed warehouses and safe houses to store the cocaine. But as the price of cocaine went up, it was considered a very wise investment. By the end of the 1980s and into the early 90s, it is estimated that Garcia Abrego was moving over 300 plus metric tons of powdered cocaine across the border each year. The large amount of sales created another problem: what to do with all the money. The U.S. government was able to confiscate approximately $53 million from the Garcia Abrego organization, but it is estimated that he was making over $10 billion a year. So that was just a drop in the bucket. Of course, he had overhead costs, but it was estimated that Garcia Abrego had $15 billion in liquid assets. He invested heavily in legitimate businesses to launder his money, such as his Piedras Negras Mexico restaurant. It was at this location that a former elite Mexican police officer named Tomas Marlet was gunned down in the back door of the restaurant. Evidently, he and Garcia Abrego had a disagreement over operations. Garcia had competitors killed or disappeared. If they did not pay him a tax, he could also call up some of his FBI contacts in the U.S. government and have them arrested. That would be a lot less messy. He is also said to have bribed the Mexican government of President Ernesto Zedillo, who was in office from 1994 to 2000, to help run his operations. But it wasn't just the Mexican government that was corrupted. Garcia Abrego had the perfect cover for his smuggling operations to get payloads across the border. He corrupted some Border Patrol officers to use their buses to transport his product. U.S. Customs inspectors never checked those, and they were quickly waved through during processing. He also corrupted the Texas National Guard to move his product throughout Texas to cities like Houston. Again, the use of Texas National Guard vehicles would not attract attention to drug interdiction officers, and he was able to get away with this for quite a while. If Mexican journalists put out bad press about him, he often had them targeted for attack, and often they were killed. This effort to silence the media in Mexico still goes on today.
News media there, how unbiased do you feel it is there? Are they scared? Because we hear a lot about the drug cartels taking out journalists. I remember there in Tijuana, Blanconelas, being
Jesus Blancornelas.
right, who did a great job for the Zeta media there in Tijuana, exposing the ties with California Mexican Mafia and the Ariano Felix organization, the Tijuana Cartel. And he was targeted several times because of that. And we have heard of journalists being killed down there that get the story right, evidently, that maybe the cartels feel threatened by what they're reporting. So what do you feel is the state of the media relations today there?
The journalists right now are scared because this huge violence against their group. Actually, Mexico is the first country in journalist killings without an open war. So the media right now it's scared, but the people it's turning their faces to different kind of medias as YouTube, non-regular media, because they have a lot of bias about who is paying the media, the government or the guys against the government. So it's just like you say, the CNN and Fox. It's the same here, but looking for different kind of information. That's a good thing. But as you know, Mexico, we have a lot of communities that even don't have cell phones or internet, and it's very hard to reach those communities. And you know, for example, here in Mexico, the journalists that expose criminal bonds with the politicians and the cartels, or even in this case of Garcia Luna with top law enforcement officers, it's tough. It's a tough job, and it's a shame that they are targeting.
It is well known that Mexican authorities knew his whereabouts, but refused to go after him. Finally, U.S. authorities put Garcia Abrego on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Mexican authorities brought him in after political pressure was applied. After Garcia Abrego was captured outside a ranch in Monterrey, Nuevo León in 1996, he was extradited to the U.S. Southern District Court in Texas, where he was tried on 22 counts of drug trafficking and convicted and sent to the Bureau of Prisons. Once one of the United States' most wanted men, Garcia Abrego is now an elderly inmate at the U.S. BOP in Hazleton. Juan's brother Humberto tried to run the organization, but did not possess the same leadership skills as his brother did. He was followed by a Gulf Cartel lieutenant in charge of moving cocaine from the Cali Cartel by the name of Oscar Malherbe de Leon, but he was soon captured in Mexico City and imprisoned by Mexican authorities on multiple counts of drug trafficking and homicide. Another Gulf Cartel lieutenant, Raul Valladares del Angel, ran it for a while until he was also arrested, thus unable to oversee operations. Many people feel it was actually Hugo Baldomero Medina Garza who held the reins after Juan Garcia Abrego's arrest. He was known as El Señor Padrino de los Trailers, Lord of the Trailers, as he used semi-truck trailers to move huge loads of cocaine into the United States. Whether or not he was the overall leader, Medina Garza was definitely in charge of operations in Reynoso and Matamoros, which are two main hub areas on the Texas-U.S. border. As a struggling mechanic, Osiel Cardenas Guillen had bigger aspirations. He killed another individual who was deemed to be Abrego Garcia's successor by the name of Salvador Gomez, and it is generally accepted that he took over the Gulf Cartel in 1999. Shortly after he assumed power, there were 2 U.S. federal agents who were stopped in Mexico and threatened by Osiel with 15 of his Gulf Cartel gunmen. Agents Du Bois and Fuentes were riding through the city of Matamoros, which they knew very well, in a white Ford Bronco marked with diplomatic plates. They worked the Gulf Cartel for years, so knew the players very well. They often even cruised past Osiel's house, a big pink house with high walls and security cameras. Within minutes, a Lincoln Continental was on their tail. Then, a truck with stolen plates from Texas added to their chase. The federal agents were cut off by the vehicles, which were joined by more vehicles. Soon they were surrounded by many men, one of them even by a police officer turned Gulf Cartel operative. They were just yards away from the city police headquarters, but surrounded by these gunmen, and knew that their lives were at stake. Being outgunned by heavy firepower, the agents' sidearms were useless. Cardenas jumped out from a Jeep Cherokee and pounded on their Bronco. In his waistband, he wore a gold-plated pistol, and in his hands, a gold-plated AK-47. The agents believed that they would be killed that day. Cardenas continued to pound on their Bronco and demand that the agents hand over their informant. Fuentes flashed his FBI badge to no avail. Cardenas just smiled and said, "I don't give a damn who you are." The memory of fellow DEA agent Enrique Camarena was fresh in their minds. Camarena was killed by the Guadalajara cartel, which I'll cover in my next episode. Cardenas told him, "Get the hell out of my territory and don't ever come back," and must have decided that it would bring too much heat to kill these 2 U.S. agents after seeing all the heat that came down after the death of DEA agent Camarena. And so the agents were able to get out of this very tense scene. But U.S. authorities were not going to let this one go. They went after Osiel with the goal of eventually capturing him, which they did. After an incident in Nuevo Laredo and seeing how his gunmen got him out of another tight situation, Osiel quickly realized the need for a military force, and he recruited the Zetas into his organization. The Zetas was a group of about 30 former federal special forces in the Mexican army, known as the GAPE. When the Zetas split from the Cartel del Golfo, there were 2 main candidates left considered for control of the organization: Antonio Cardenas, known as Tony Tormentas, and Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sanchez, known as El Cas. Some sources believe that at the time, the Cartel del Golfo actually was seeking an alliance with the Cartel de Sinaloa. But the Zetas did not want to recognize this treaty, as they had been engaging in combat with Cartel de Sinaloa. This was part of the reason that they decided to become independent and break off from the Gulf Cartel. Some sources believe that the final breaking point between the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas was when Samuel Flores Borrego, aka El Metro Tres, a lieutenant in the Gulf Cartel, had a disagreement with Sergio Peña Mendoza, also known as El Concord Tres, who was a lieutenant in the Zetas. This was a dispute over the Reynosa Tamaulipas Plaza, which both were protecting for their respective organizations. Soon after Concord Tres's death, which they believed was tied to El Metro Tres, the Zetas demanded that the Gulf Cartel hand over the killer, but they didn't. And this was the final straw for the Zetas. They decided they would no longer work with the Cartel del Golfo. While the Zetas were known for being very barbaric, they were not the only ones. The Cartel del Golfo also was known to have stone-cold brutal killers, even while they sometimes assumed the role of a good father and good husband. Osiel's brother, Antonio/Tony Tormentas, died after an 8-hour gunfight with Mexican authorities in November 2010. This battle took place in the city of Matamoros, located in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. It is said that there were more than 600 Marines involved in this operation, and they worked with 3 helicopters. At the end, 8 people were dead, including 3 Mexican Marines, 1 soldier, and 4 Gulf Cartel gunmen, including Tony Tormentas. 1 newspaper reporter was also killed in the crossfire. From 2011 to 2013, there was a lot of feuding going on, very tense time between the 2 organizations. But the Zetas' young trained killers, Zetas, still pulled off drug ripoffs and did hit like these 4 hired sicarios. But Zetas' leadership and patience was worn thin with the Cartel del Golfo. The death of Osiel's brother, Tony Tormentas, allowed for Costilla Sanchez Cas to become the major leader in the Gulf Cartel, and he had his hit squad, Los Metros, working for him. Meanwhile, Mario Cardenas Guillen, the younger brother of Osiel and Tony, became a leader in another Gulf faction that Antonio had led, and he was in charge of Los Rojos, basically a paramilitary parallel version of Los Metros. Cas was often viewed as the strongest leader when talking about Tony Tormentas and Mario in the Rojos faction. In addition to Los Rojos, Antonio had recruited another group called Los Escorpiones, which was also a mercenary group that worked for him. Like the Zetas, the Scorpions were comprised of over 60 dedicated fighters, former police officers, and even ex-military officials. There are even several videos on YouTube that exalted the power of this group through narco corridos, which is the favorite music of the cartels. But there's some evidence that Osiel, even though he was jailed, disapproved of this group, since he feared that they would do the same thing as the Zetas and turn against the Gulf Cartel. But his brother did not listen, and when Antonio was killed, the 4 gunmen that were with him were believed to be Scorpions. So like I said, there was this factional feud in the Gulf Cartel between Los Rojos and Los Metros. Those who stayed loyal to the Cardenas family worked with Los Rojos. Those that preferred Casas' leadership worked with Los Metros. Individuals like Flores Borrego defended the Metros until he was killed in September 2010. In addition to Los Rojos and Metros, Los Ciclones and Los Panteras later became mini armies of the Gulf Cartel and fought against factions of the Zetas. that were starting to have their own problems. Alcas was arrested in September 2012, and he pled guilty to multiple charges, including distributing over 450 kilos of cocaine and more than 90,000 kilos of marijuana. Currently, the Gulf Cartel is in disarray and very fractured. Osiel, still incarcerated, has very little control today over the Gulf Cartel, but I'm sure he tries to get messages out. And so the bloodshed continues today in northeastern Mexico between factions of the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas, but have no doubt there is spillover here into the United States, especially in South Texas. I hope you learned something from this episode and that you continue watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe buttons. Until next time, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.